Yeah, hi folks. Yes, as I've said before, wokeness is destroying the West. It is a far left brain disease that is destroying the West from the inside. And we are witnessing the end result of that in Afghanistan right now. Biden lost to the Taliban for no other reason than his whole administration is controlled by the woke folk. Their whole worldview is about political correctness and identity politics, etc. None of which is good during peace times, let alone war.
The world's at a dangerous tipping point. You've got America, leader of the free world, in obvious decline. You've got China, the biggest dictatorship in history, on the rise, wanting to be top dog. And now, at this dangerous moment, the US gets a president who's obviously senile, who's catastrophically weak. I mean, it's hard to exaggerate how dangerously bad Joe Biden is, how closer to war we are as a result, when the US is led by a man so weak that he seems to doze off even during a meeting last week with Israel's Prime Minister. And just have a look at the last week. Biden's already had the Taliban take over Afghanistan after he suddenly pulled out all US troops so fast that it actually left the Taliban a massive amount of US armoury, including up to 2,000 armoured vehicles and 40 aircraft and bundles of cash. Biden has already also left US allies trapped in Afghanistan because he failed to keep a secure US base in the country. And his officials were then left so dependent on Taliban security that they even, in a brainless moment, gave the Taliban a list of Afghan allies to help evacuate. A list that the Taliban can now use to find and punish those former enemies of it.
Now, how dumb was that?
And then last week came the suicide bomber who killed some 200 people at the airport, including 13 US troops. And Biden, by then, seemed broken. In his press conference after that tragedy, he even had the shame to hide behind his dead son, Beau, falsely implying that his son's war service had caused his fatal brain cancer. So, as a result, Biden then knew what those grieving families were going through, what it was to lose a son in action.
When he came home after a year in Iraq, was diagnosed, like many coming home, with an aggressive and lethal cancer of the brain.
So somehow the army causes cancer. Really, Joe?
But we lost. You get this feeling like you're being sucked into a black hole in the middle of your chest. There's no way out.
Now, when he finished that self-pitying, meandering, flustering kind of press conference, Joe Biden actually had to be told by his minders what next to say to the journalists there.
Ladies and gentlemen, they gave me a list here. The first person I was instructed to call on was Kelly O'Donnell of NBC.
Yeah, so just a minute, folks, while I look for my answer.
Where is this man's mind? Here's the final insult. When the bodies of 11 of the 13 dead servicemen were flown back from Afghanistan to the US, Biden, good, he was there to meet them, but then openly checked his watch as if he'd had better places to be. I mean, maybe bed for another nap. Now, I know these are just impressions. Maybe I've got even some things out of context. That's possible. But these images are what the world sees. And what they add up to is this: a picture of someone very weak and clueless. I was joined a short while ago by Brendan O'Neill, editor of the online magazine Spiked, and a very sharp observer of trends in our civilization, most of which I have to say are trending down. I asked Brendan, how serious was it for the West when its most powerful nation is led by a man so clearly past it.
It's very serious indeed. I mean, if we look at what Joe Biden has done to Afghanistan via this withdrawal, I mean, this is the kind of person who should not be in charge of America and, by extension, a lot of the world. I mean, he has left the Taliban with 20,000 Humvees, 170 tanks, hundreds of thousands of guns, and more than 100 helicopters. So this is how the war on terror ends. The war on terror ends with the American president, Joe Biden, arming the side that attacked America on 9/11 20 years ago. It is just extraordinary. He has just handed an incredible victory, military and political, to this ruthless Islamist movement, which has close ties to Al-Qaeda. Any president who does that is not fit for the job, and people have to wake up to that fact.
It really scares me, Brendan, because, I mean, it's not just the culture wars, there's the real wars we've got to think about. It's always a point of danger when you get a rising power that thinks it's time for its moment in the sun, obviously in this case China, meeting a declining power that might still lash out, one last slash if that rising power challenges it too much. I just wonder what message China is going to take out of this.
Well, that's the thing, what message is this going to send to other countries around the world? I mean, China will be, and Iran as well, and Russia, they will be watching the events in Afghanistan with keen interest. And what they will see is an American empire in decline. They will see that America has become an untrustworthy ally. It didn't stand by the Afghan people. It didn't stand by the Afghan forces or the Afghan government that it helped to create. It just walked away from them. So the message that this sends to the world is that America doesn't have much of a backbone. It doesn't have a stomach for a fight. It abandons its allies at the first sign of trouble, and it cannot be trusted. And this will benefit enormously America's opponents, especially China, which is already making moves to have a healthy relationship with the Taliban, a fruitful relationship with the Taliban. And it will send a message to people around the world who might normally have looked to America for help. Don't bother. America won't stand by you. So this is catastrophic for the United States, and Joe Biden needs to own it.
Now, I actually think it's not just a sign of America's diplomatic or military sort of decline, but also cultural decline. I wonder, look, am I seeing too much into this? I mean, looking at symbols, I know, but still, Biden's vice president, the woman who'd step in if he couldn't go on, the woman who said that the evacuation of US nationals from Afghanistan was a top priority, was actually in Vietnam over the weekend, holding talks there with people representing the disabled and the LGBT community. Somehow, Brendan, that strikes me as rather telling.
You're considered the most liberal United States senator.
Somebody said that, and it actually was Mike Pence on the debate stage. But
yeah, well, actually, the nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator.
Let's talk about Peggy.
You once again gave a non-answer. Joe Biden gave a non-answer.
Trying to answer you
the
now.
American people deserve a straight answer.
And is that a socialist or progressive perspective?
No.
It'd be important if you said the truth. Joe Biden said twice in the debate last week that
you landed haymakers on Joe Biden. How do you go from being such a passionate opponent?
It was a debate.
Ron Gold has said that he is for the legalization of marijuana recreationally. Your thoughts on that?
That he is entitled to his opinion.
So if it was legalized all throughout the country and medicinal, would you do it?
Listen, again? I think that it gives a lot of people joy, and we need more joy.
Very telling indeed. I mean, it's such a delicious irony in some ways. You have the vice president in a former country that America was at war with for a long time, and where America walked away in 1975 in the infamous Saigon the withdrawal, and she's there in that country, in Vietnam, pushing this woke agenda onto the local people and refusing to talk about Afghanistan, the new theater of America's decline, the new theater that demonstrates that America is a power on the way out on the global stage. So it was really, really telling. And what it suggests is that part of the problem for the United States now is wokeness.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not just America, it's everywhere in the West.
Wokeness, I think, is the form that decadence now takes. This is like the last days of the Roman Empire, twiddling your thumbs while Rome burns. What we have in the United States situation is pushing naff, stupid, woke politics about gender and whatever else it might be, while the world burns, while Afghanistan burns.
Yeah, and while this is happening, the decadent woke folk are talking about very, very important issues. Should men breastfeed?
In terms of product design, it's a very clever thing to have achieved. Tell us, this is a prototype in a way, isn't it? You haven't actually used it yet on men, is that right? But talk us through how you hope it would work, or the science behind it.
So basically, the way I designed it is that new couples, when they find out that they're expecting, sign up to basically a prenatal course. Similar ones exist on the NCT, and they'll receive a kit in which it contains sort of 9 months of a drug called progestin, which we know is the non-estrogen-based birth control pill.
You mean if they were going to do this, they would do that?
Yeah.
Right, yes.
And what that does, at least in women, is convince your body that you're already pregnant. So it changes your breast tissue so that you can store milk. 6 weeks before the birth, they start taking a drug called domperidone, which sounds very scary, but it's actually...
sounds like champagne.
Indeed. But it was originally used to treat gut conditions, and they realised that it has a side effect, which is lactation. So now it's used by a lot of women who are struggling to lactate.
But hang on, how would either of those drugs, men don't have breasts, how would it enable them to produce milk and express it through the nipple? How would that work?
Well, the tissue is actually there. It's just dormant. So actually, there are several cases where lactation does occur naturally in men.
Really?
Yes, there's a condition called gynecomastia. It affects 60% of men. Most people never realise that they even have it. But just the estrogen gets a little higher than testosterone. In extreme cases, men can grow up to the size of a B cup and produce milk.
All right, the key question, what's the point?
Exactly.
What's the point? It's because partly I designed this first as an empathy tool. I was looking at postnatal depression, and I learned so much, particularly that it occurs in men. And the main cause of that is the feeling of being left out.
The feeling of being left out.
For the main trigger for women is the struggle to breastfeed.
It's sad if a man feels left out because his wife's or partner's breastfeeding, isn't it?
You don't say.
It's not necessarily because they're breastfeeding. It's more, you have things that come into play, things like infant preference. So I read a lot of really heartfelt accounts of, the baby comes home, the dad is all ready to be super dad, and the baby is not interested because the baby's attracted to the smell of breast milk. That's what mum smells like.
It's a very primal thing, isn't it, that connection for that baby? It's about survival for the baby, so they are very connected, and the mother's possibly feeling that too. Although, as you rightly say, many mums do struggle. So could it practically be an alternative, do you think, for men to breastfeed?
Absolutely. So I've had a mixed bunch of feedback from this, but it's an alternative option.
Wow, this woke nutter is dangerous. She's trying to turn men into women.
Okay.
And it's a very practical one that allows parents to bond as much as actually solve a problem.
Is it an option you'd ever take up, Quentin?
Well, I think this is a storm in a B cup.
Oh,
pardon the pun here. I've got 3 kids, and this is not an urge I have ever had.
No.
And I don't think any man has. Anyway, now to the woke police.
Now, let's move to some news from the UK. Police over there are replacing patrol cars with what they call hate crime cars in an attempt to encourage people to report hate crimes and mean tweets. The cars will be painted with pride rainbow designs along with police insignia. That's not all that's happening in the UK. They have also reached the 1-month milestone since Freedom Day, where the government removed all remaining COVID restrictions even though the country was recording around 50,000 new cases a day. I'm joined by one of our favourite Brits, political commentator and host of Reasoned UK, Darren Grimes. Darren, thanks for joining us. Tell us about these clown cars, hate crime cars. What's been the reaction to this news?
Oh, it's mental, Rita. It's good to be with you. I mean, Rita, put yourself in the position of a hardened criminal, right? A real menacing thug. And imagine one of these rainbow so-called hate crime cars turns up with an officer that gets out of the car wearing a rainbow polo shirt. And he isn't exactly going to instill the fear of God into you, is he? I mean, you're right to use the word clown cars. They are clown cars. And increasingly, the police force in this country is being taken as a clown force, not the enforcers of the law here in Britain. And I think the problem is, right, that most people, Rita, and this happens in Australia as well as Britain, they are concerned about high levels of, or increasing levels of crime in certain parts. In our capital city, for example, in London, there are mothers that are calling for continued stop and search tactics to ensure that their son or daughter manages to make it home that evening without falling victim to knife or gang crime under the leadership of Mayor Sadiq Khan. Things have got that bad. So when you consider all of that, you would think that the country's top police cheeses, arguing that these cars, flags and garments actually give confidence by having that rainbow out there in the community. That's their language, not mine. And I'm sorry, but as a sort of long-suffering member now of the ever-elongating LGBTQIA plus alphabet soup, whatever it is these days, a member of that rainbow-clad cult, Rita, I say this is patronising guff. This isn't some country in which gay men and women go about their business in a permanent sort of state of fear. This is a country in which gay men and women can live their lives as we always long to do so, as members of society, Rita, that are just as boring as heterosexual couples. And long may that continue. There is absolutely no justification for these moves, extravagant excesses on the taxpayer and the politicisation, actually, of our police force to this extent. People want the police out there solving actual crimes, solving burglaries, for example, violent crime, which they're saying they can't do because they're overstretched at the minute, criminal damage, people attacking statues and all of these other things, instead of driving around in vomit-inducing clown mobiles.
Yeah, and of course you can't say women anymore.
We like Senator Claire Chandler on this. She's always on top of what's going on with the war on women. James?
Yeah, well, look, absolutely. And look, that ad we just saw, that really does put in perspective what a war on women really does look like. We see the horrifying scenes out of Afghanistan. But, here we have our own trouble. And as we reported in the Daily Telegraph this week, vaccination's the big issue at the moment. The health department wants everybody to go out and get the jab. But instead of encouraging, people to go out and get vaccinated or whatever, they have been spending their time and their money rewriting a guide to COVID-19 vaccination for pregnant women and then going out and republishing the whole thing, taking out 50 references to pregnant women and replacing them with pregnant people. And if you're a pregnant person, can I get vaccinated? And if I'm a breastfeeding person, can I get vaccinated? Because, of course, we can't say breastfeeding women anymore because that might, be accurate.
Yes, folks, George Orwell's Ministry of Truth is now reality. Now, heaven forbid we have another world war and they bring back the military draft. We'd have a bunch of woke folk running around in circles complaining about the enemy using the wrong pronouns.